Okay. Welcome from Kilifi, Kenya, to the continent, to the rest of the world. I'm Kevin Mochiro. I'm your host, and I'll be moderating this panel that will discuss queer representation in Africa, basically the media, arts, books, films, visibility, and basically it's queer representation in Africa, media, art, books, and film, visibility, violence, or violation. Bit of a mouthful there. Just to let you know who I am, Kevin. I'm a writer, a journalist, and podcaster based here in Kenya. With me is a panel from Uganda, Nigeria, via America, Ghana, and South Africa. Thank you all for being here. And if you could just kindly introduce yourselves and introduce yourselves and then tell me what's the thing that blew you away today before we begin. Maybe I'll just throw it over to in order of, we'll start off with Achiro.
Hi, I'm Achiro. I'm Achiro Pure Watch. I'm a writer and producer, and I make films as well.
Sorry, Achiro, you went mute there.
I'm Achiro Pure Watch, and I'm a writer and producer, a filmmaker from Uganda.
Okay. Anything that made you go wow today?
Wow, as in through the day, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, since lockdown has been lifted in Uganda, we're kind of like almost back to normal. But I wouldn't necessarily say back to normal because, the cases of COVID still keep rising, although nobody's died yet. But yeah, so not really. No, nothing out of the ordinary happened that made me go, wow. Because I work at home, so I'm literally in the house and it's only news that reaches me through my phone or something. So no, nothing really.
Okay, thank you. We'll move over to you two, Unoma.
Yes, I am Unoma Azua. I'm a teacher and a writer, and I have a special love for queer scholarship, which I try to do as much as I can. And the thing that wowed me today is the realization that I have to learn how to separate the white in an egg because the doctor recommended I stop eating the yolk.
Okay. That's a good wow.
Thank you.
I will go over to South Africa. Mark?
Oh, actually, I'm in Canada.
Oh, you're in Canada. My apologies, Mark.
I'm in Canada right now. Yeah. So,
good morning.
I was in South Africa, but when the lockdown started, I had to be repatriated. So I am Canadian. I'm a historian at Queen's University, and I've been living in Southern Africa off and on since the mid 1980s. So. In terms of wow today, it's only noon, so not much of today has happened yet over this side. But in terms of wow, I have to say, I get a wow every time I check the news from the States. And today with the news with Trump was attacking the top medical professional, the Dr. Fauci and retreating. I don't know how much I can take reading the news anymore. It's just too much. But that was my wow. And the other thing is it's a beautiful sunny day. And, it's really nice here weather-wise.
Excellent. And over to Ghana.
Hi, I'm Chike Frankie Adosian, and I'm a journalist and a university professor and administrator. I'm currently in Accra, Ghana, where I live now. And so I'm happy to be here. There's a bunch of things that made me go wow today, none of them particularly good news. I understand that our brothers and sisters in Namibia, or really our sisters in Namibia, will be having an abortion rights march this weekend, which made me go wow, because I thought, that would not be something they would be forced to do, and also just checking the wires. I've just found out that the United States, for the first time in 17 years, has just executed a person by lethal injection. So it's been a day of just, oh my God. But, you know, it's 2020, so everything's topsy-turvy. But I'm really pleased to be here among all of you.
Thank you all, and it's a pleasure to host you or moderate you during this session. And it's interesting that the last two contributions touched on the media, which is what we're talking about today. Queer representation, that's just in the mainstream media, but through different outlets. My first question to the panel is, in your opinion, has the media grown in its coverage of queer individuals on the continent? And if you do, have a good news story of how you've seen the media evolve in its coverage of queer individuals. If you could kindly throw that in, please. In the same order, maybe I'll start with you, Achiro, being in Uganda, looking at the fact that there was the now Dead in the Water Anti-Homosexuality Act, and the media there has been very critical in the coverage of queer individuals. Do you think they have evolved? Is there better representation?
I don't think so. I think it's relatively the same. If anything, the media right now is being scrutinized. Like anybody that is doing anything, any coverage, whether it's positive or negative on the queer community, and they're really being scrutinized, and many people are being warned against it. Although there still is coverage, I mean, at the end of the day, people still do write or tweet, and that's mainly people that are within the community, and they try to like get their voices out there. This period hasn't really been a good one for us, because then it has almost been used as an excuse to harass people of the queer community in one way or another, and also in terms of media representation and them actually getting the word out, they've tried and quelled it. So no, I don't think it's really changed much. I think it's basically the same, and anybody who tries to report on it does it at their own peril. So.
And can I just ask, do you think, especially in a country like Uganda with COVID, that the government is using that as a way of quelling the media, or quelling the rights of queer people in coverage of the media? Achiro, so are you there?
I do. I think so. I really do think so. They took advantage of it, because as soon as it started, one of the first places that they fell upon was a queer community. It's a safe house, actually, that helps young men and women, especially young men who have been ostracized by their communities. And I feel that it really wasn't called for. It was something that they took advantage of the situation, because in the past I made a film and gone to this particular safe house, and the community and the chairman and everybody has supposedly been okay with them being there. But as soon as the whole lockdown thing started, that was the first community that was affected. Then we've heard of different families that have ostracized members of the queer community. So I think our government, the media took advantage of this whole situation. And I think they took advantage of the whole COVID situation and the whole lockdown to kind of like find another and something else wrong, or just to quell or to step upon the queer community's rights. So yeah, I think they took advantage of it.
Frankie, being a journalist yourself, and now in Accra and also teaching in the States, from the other side of the newsroom, tell me, and what are your thoughts on the question? Has the media in Africa evolved in its coverage over the last, let's say, 10 years or so?
So I think maybe I'll talk about the two places that I actually observe a lot, because it would be difficult for me to talk about so many other parts of the continent. But I think that what we've seen in Nigeria and Ghana, where I am at the moment, has not been great. In terms of Ghana, it's never really been great, but it's also not as terrible as their big brothers next door. I find that when I compare the coverage of LGBTQ issues in Nigeria, for instance, there is this sense of salaciousness, and almost as if journalists who are writing the stories have taken a position and they want to shame and embarrass and punish people who maybe have been accused of being gay by the police, or just adding more trauma to them. On the flip side of that, there's also, I think that when I look at coverage of things that are happening in Nollywood, whenever there's like a queer character that is filled with stereotype and, you know, a caricature. And I do see some of the reviews of those characters as being totally unrealistic. So I can see tiny little shifts in the fact that people see our lives in its complexity, whether they agree or not, but they certainly see its complexity. As opposed to what's going on in Uganda. Here in Ghana, there hasn't been much coverage of this issue due to COVID, because everyone's really sort of like focusing on COVID. And that's sort of like the one difference I see between Nigeria and Ghana, is that when things, anti-LGBT things flare up in the media here in Ghana, it's usually triggered by something. Whereas in Nigeria, it seems to just be the order of the day, any single day that somebody wants to do something. Currently, there's a new film about a lesbian, a documentary that's premiered in Lagos. And I have seen a couple of the reviews, and they have not been as awful in their characterization as I would have expected. So there is a little bit of nuance, not to say that it's been good, but it's been, you know, a sense that I feel like people are actually looking at the work and judging the work versus the salaciousness of, there's a film that's new that has lesbians in it, or there's a documentary about lesbians in it, and that takes over all the coverage. So I think what I'm seeing is that it's incremental, the baby steps, but there are baby steps.
Norma, having come from Nigeria, would you want to add on to that and also share your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Like everyone has said, I guess it's a problem across Africa. It's still as bad as it has always been, but I wouldn't deny the fact that there's a pushback from the LGBT community. And I like the fact that there's a resistance. For example, as Frank just mentioned, Equality Hub released the movie Ife about two lesbian lovers. And of course, the Nigerian Film Censorship Board, they're out with arms. And they said that they're going to make sure they track down the people behind it, whatever that means. But I'm just celebrating the fact that in spite of the pervasive narrative about LGBT people, that there are a group of LGBT persons and communities changing and fighting back to say, no, our lives are very much different from what you keep presenting. So in that sense, there's a little bit of, as Frankie said, improvement. And then social media is helping, of course.
But the fact that you have a film directed by a Nigerian, you know, is another aspect of the media. Is the queer community taking advantage of opportunities like that to sort of subtly, you know, make our presence felt outside of the newsroom? And this goes to the panel as well.
So if I may just say, it's difficult, I think, to lump us all together, you know, because I don't think that, you know, certainly in Nigeria and certainly not in Ghana, that you would find a unified queer community. But to answer to your question is that there are people and individuals and groups who are saying this time of other people presenting our lives and our stories for us is over. You know, there are people, I mean, Norma has a new book coming out, or she has a book that came out in March. There are other people who are writing their lives, and they are saying that no matter what you say in your press, we will now be able to tell our own stories, unfiltered, unvarnished. And you may not like it, but the stories are there and they're coming out. And I think for 2020 and 2019, COVID-19, that has been just a wonderful thing to see. The push for many people to tell their own stories, wherever they fall in the LGBTQIA spectrum on our continent.
Okay. Okay, Mark, I'd like to draw you in to share the experience from Southern Africa and your thoughts.
Yeah, well, if I can just follow up on what Frankie was saying there, I'll mention a great success. I think there's been so many in the last couple of years. The Botswana High Court overturning the sodomy law, and the media in South Africa, for example, is generally very good, I would say. But I can speak mostly to the academic sphere. And again, just following up on what Frankie said. So here's an example. You know, there's a, last year it came out, it's called the Global Encyclopedia of LGBTQ Histories. And, you know, queer theory in practice has been very dominated by Western voices, to say the least, right? If I know there was a book a few years ago, it was called Global Queer. It had 4 references to Africa in the entire book. And basically there were 2, it was referring to 2 studies. Each got 2 mentions, you know, in passing or in a footnote. So Africa has been treated as a footnote in the dominant thrust of queer scholarship globally. But this new encyclopedia has come out, and Africa is very well represented. And so these are Africa-based or in many cases African scholars who have relocated to the States or somewhere else. But the majority of the contributors, and there's about 70 in this whole encyclopedia, there's about 76 entries on Africa, you know, so you can name some by country, some by theme, activism, HIV, et cetera, et cetera. So all these entries, so that's more than any other region in the world, except I think North America still has the majority, which reflects the legacy of, you know, where the scholars are. But among that 76, did I say 76? I think 76, the majority of the contributors were African, and also they were female. So I think that's just fantastic. I don't know how many would identify personally as queer, but a lot were. So they're getting their voice out into the academic sphere that has never happened to that extent before. Now, the problem with that encyclopedia, not to go on too much, it's huge, it's fantastic, there's some really great stuff there, but it's really, really expensive. It's published in the States. So it's probably not widely available in Africa, but if any of you want me to send you some illegal PDFs, I'm happy to do that. You know, we'll spread the knowledge.
Thank you very much for that, right? But you look, you've got 2 writers on this panel and a filmmaker, you know. I just wanted to reflect on the issue of representation. And to you, the panel, I want to ask, when was the first time you saw queer representation in Africa media that you were able to identify with, you know, and you said, I was home? You know, if you could share that with us, just to be able to think about the importance of representation. You know, Frankie, you said it's 2020 is a time for people owning their stories, telling their stories. But what was that moment like for you, and when was that? When you saw yourself being represented, whether it's text, screen, audiovisual, artistically, if you could kindly please share that.
It's difficult because I'm not quite sure. And one of the things that I certainly realize now, in the benefit of like hindsight, or after looking at the work that I've done, is that it really does make a difference to see yourself and to be able to be recognized. For a very long time, I just did not see anything that I could hold on to and say that I was in there. You know, I'm wearing a t-shirt, I don't think you can see it, but the t-shirt says "Book Saved My Life." You know, so that would tell you about my trajectory in literature and in writing. And in reading so many things from around the world and even on our continent, and not really thinking that any of those characters were me. So it's sort of like an appreciation from a distance, you know?
Okay.
And when I was writing Lives of Great Men, one of the things that I wanted to do was to be able to have this for people, for all of the men and women that I interviewed, have a place where they could go in literature and see their lives reflected. Now, I think that that's changing now. The book initially came out in the West in 2017 and in 2018 on the African continent. I think since then, there have been things that have come out in blogs, in magazines, in poetry, that really talk about our lives. And the one takeaway that I have, even though sometimes I struggle to see myself in those things, is that I think that we're at a moment where we are not interested in waiting or having validation from outside. We are telling our stories and doing our things ourselves. Okay, I'll give you just one quick example, is that during this entire lockdown period, over the last 6 weeks, there have been a group of African writers who did and are continuing to do almost every other week a virtual literary festival called Afro Sans Frontières. Within those 4 weeks that we have had, I have seen more LGBTQ queer works and writers and poets talk about their work in a festival that's about Africa, not necessarily about queer stuff. You know, I had been introduced to people who I might not have met or understood their work in other space. And I think that for us in this moment, that is where the thrill comes in. That I can go to Johannesburg and go to Soweto and go to an Abantu book festival and see books by us that I may not get the chance to see in Barnes & Noble when I'm in New York, or, you know, anywhere on a London high street. And I think that there is a validation that I have now from looking inwards that I didn't have in my 20s when I looked outward. And I think that it's not just me, I think it's a lot of us on the continent who know that we will always be depicted as other. We will always be different in the eyes of some. But among ourselves, it's where it matters the most.
Okay, thank you, Frankie. Unoma.
Well, I got excited early, I think in the early 90s, when I noticed that Nollywood is actually featuring lesbian characters, you know, and I tried to follow that trend, and it became almost as if they're obsessed with the topic, even though at the end of every movie, of course, the lesbians or the gay men get killed. So I gave up on them until Pamela Adie came up with Under the Rainbow documentary. And unfortunately, that's actually the one and only positive representation of a queer, I mean, a lesbian life that I could identify with, you know, and even though the review hasn't been good, considering the fact that the dominant media reviewers in Nigeria are mostly homophobic, but I was excited, and I always celebrate that, the fact that Amelia did that for the rest of the lesbians in Nigeria and across Africa.
Okay.
And if I may just jump in here, it's so sad to me that it took so long, because Under the Rainbow is relatively new as far as documentaries go. This is something that I think is a 2018 work, and people are still finding it. But can you imagine how long it took before somebody like Unoma could see herself represented in documentary filmmaking?
Achiro, you're a filmmaker, a writer. When was that moment for you that you saw yourself represented on the mediascape, African mediascape? Achiro, can you hear me?
Now I can. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay. For me, I think I wasn't really seeing anything I could identify with on the African media scale. I was looking more at Western things that were showing me something I could identify with. But then when Call Me Kuchu came out, more recently, I think it was in the late 90s, early 20s, like more recently in the 2000s. That is when there was something that I was like, okay, this is Ugandan. This is something that talks about something close to what I would identify with. But then when God Loves Uganda came out, for me as a filmmaker, as a writer, as a queer person in Uganda, it actually riled me and made me almost angry and made me want to tell my story, made me want to be one of those people, one of those writers, one of those filmmakers who wanted to tell their own story. And for me, of oppression, I wanted to tell real life stories so that it would be more like I'm a real person. It's not always me hiding under the table or stuff like that. But so yeah, so I didn't really see a lot of that representation in the media unless it was an oppressive thing or basically in that light. And that is where I came in and decided I wanted to make a difference. And that's how, for me, my life started in terms of now being the representation, now being the person that somebody can actually identify with and say, oh, she made a documentary or she made a film from Uganda about the LGBT community. So for me, that was my journey.
Okay. I must commend you, Achiro, and I think what you said is really important, that especially in your work, as you choose to change the narrative about being queer in Uganda, and saying, yes, we are here. Not everyone is as oppressed, and you're able to live a full queer life. So thank you for that and what you're trying to do. Mark, what about your thoughts? How have you seen, African representation, make an impact on fellow Africans from your time in South Africa?
That's a good question. Again, I can speak mostly to the academic side, although I'll mention one very interesting graphic novel, or it's not a graphic novel, short stories from Kenya. That's published by the Gay and Lesbian Archive or Gay and Lesbian Memory in Action based in Johannesburg. I don't know if anyone has seen it, but it's beautifully done, a beautiful artwork, and they're basically coming out stories, or not coming out stories. Some of them are kind of romance stories, some are dealing with family issues, but it's put out by a collective of young, well, mostly young LGBTQ people from Kenya, South Africa, and I think there's a few other places. So now the name of, I'm forgetting the name of it off the top of my head, but it's just hot off the press, maybe a couple of months ago. I'll get that and I can send it to you. So that's a beautiful piece of accessible literature, if I can put it that way. It's a comic book, but with really thoughtful analysis and moving stories by young people. So what impact this kind of thing happens on the street kind of question, I can't say, but it seems it's a cumulative, slow motion, sometimes positive thing. I'd like to believe that, although, again, Noma, maybe you can talk about living in the States when you think things are going forward, and then suddenly you're back to the Middle Ages with some of the political rhetoric that happens, and so I do worry about the popularity, for example, of, Pentecostal movements that are very, very aggressive in this kind of a new homophobia that makes me worried. So I've noticed a number of Christian leaders have come out in the last few years with a much more tolerant perspective on these questions. And there's some good again, academic work out there, but that wasn't there. But then they're offset to some extent by the kind of the reaction from the Pentecostal side, not just to pick on the Pentecostals, but in the South African, Southern Africa, I would say too, Zimbabwe, it's very strong. And so that's a worry. And particularly in a time like of COVID and other economic crisis, people are looking to kind of simple solutions to everything, you know, and the prosperity gospel, you're going to get rich by you pray to this particular God in a certain way who hates homosexuals, and you'll get rich. And so unfortunately, you know, that's attractive to people in time of crisis. And that worries me a lot.
Okay. Can I just ask, Mark, within academia, is there room for this to be discussed by Africans to talk about queer realities?
There is, absolutely, in my experience. And so more and more, like I said, in the case of that encyclopedia, so I was the regional editor for Africa. And at the beginning, they told me they needed 50 entries. I had to think of 50 different topics. And then we started talking, it got up to 75. And then said, okay, I think I can think of 75 people, you know, the whole continent who could write on this. And then they said, multiply that by 3 in case someone says no. And then you need backups. So, you know, I had to come up with a list of over 200 people. Now, they weren't all Africans, they weren't all in Africa, but the fact that I was able to do that, and by word of mouth, people, no, that person over there is doing this fantastic work. So the space was created in a way that was really, really positive. And I've been to conferences where, you know, in the old days, so when I started, you know, any conference panel with the word queer in it would not get well attended, to say the least, unless people were coming for kind of sensationalist or, you know, lurid purposes, whatever. Let's see who those weird people are. But now, you know, so for example, we had a conference just no, it's 2 years ago now. Stephen O'Murray, I don't know if people know him. There was a book, a collection, 1998, one of the first academic compilations out there that highlighted scholarship on queer issues in Africa. So not many Africans contributed to that. In fact, the majority of the contributors were either historical authors, who were in most cases European, like travelers and missionaries and that, or North American-based academics like myself. But it was, the book was called Boy Wives and Female Husbands. And now Stephen O'Murray died, kind of tragically. Anyway, everyone who dies, it's tragic, but he was too young to go, in my view. He had lots more to contribute, but he died. And so I organized a panel, you know, 20 years of reflection on the impact of the book. And we're getting a second edition coming out. It's going to be published in Africa, in Kenya, actually. And it's going to be freely available online. And anyways, we had this panel, and I would say about a quarter of the entire conference. So this is a Canadian African Studies Association. So it's not specializing in gender and sexuality at all. Mostly it's politics and economics. And we had this panel on queer topics, and about a quarter of the entire conference delegates came to it, not out of curiosity, but because they really wanted to learn. And I felt it was a really, really positive environment. And people were speaking out. There were people there from all over Africa, openly making contributions, sometimes critical, sometimes you know, self-reflexive, but it was just a really good vibe and a good space. So I'm seeing that more and more.
Okay. I mean, Frankie and Unoma, you're also in that academic space. Are you seeing any movement in that grounds in terms of academia or scholarship in regards to queer theory or queer writing or queer representation? And also the fact that Mark mentioned a lot of initially the writers were not African, and brings me to our next phase of our conversation. Whose right is it to tell those stories?
Well, from my experience, when I published my first queer article, late 90s, there were really no Nigerian academia, for example, that I know that ventured into queer writing. Instead, of course, that was an area that was stigmatized. And when I started writing on queer studies, I lost a lot of my friends. And I even got threats that, oh, you're going to be cut off from certain circles or certain opportunities. And I was fine with it. So I'm happy that today, there are quite a number of Nigerian scholars who are delving into queer studies. And I think with time, it's going to improve, hopefully. And then the other thing is that it's our story, but nobody's writing it because of the fear And because of the stigma, there are one or two or few people who venture into queer studies or queer writing, but to me, that's not enough. And I'm happy that more of us are going into it, because this narrative that keeps putting us down must be changed. You know, so I go with, be the change that you want to see. So like Achiro is doing and the rest of us, we have to just keep pushing forward.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. My mute off? Yeah. I think that, you know, for a lot of what I have seen of late, now not historically, but of late, is that there are people who are here on our continent who are studying this stuff. But like everything else, are we getting African academics on the continent the ability to show up and do those papers at international conferences? It's tough enough for an academic who is at the University of Ghana or the University of Lagos or wherever to be able to go and do one conference internationally. It's just not always feasible. But I believe that I've seen some stuff, and I think, as Unoma mentioned, there are a few more academics who are writing these papers. Now, where they're being delivered, I'm not so sure, because of the high cost it is to bring an academic from the continent to a major international conference that is outside of the African continent. Even within the continent, travel, it's difficult. What I have focused on is not so much on the academy, because I think that what we have to be in a place where commercially we can put our stories out there. Because as much as I like working for a university and teaching in a classroom, you know, let's face it, academic books tend to be books that are read by scholars and academics. And if we really want to change perceptions and change mind, we have to be able to produce work that is not taxed, that is available, maybe not freely, but easily accessible. And so my big push has been for more commercial publishing of our stories on the African continent, where someone can easily go and pick up a book or do a download of a book with nobody saying, what is it you're buying or what is it, and privately read that stuff. I mean, I think that having a lot of our work in the academies actually are wonderful and will be a feather in our cap. But the reality is that we need more people on the ground who will never see the inside of a university library, who will never be invited to a major university conference to have access to this information, whether it's historical fiction or nonfiction or contemporary work about the LGBTQIA lives on this continent. We need more people to be able to have that. And that is why I'm very, very pleased that we're seeing documentaries and we're seeing books come out. Wherever they are, if they are commercial books, that means anyone might be able to have a chance to buy it. If they are an academic book, the audience is very limited. And for right now, you know, my hope is that we can get a larger audience to see our stories and realize that our stories are their stories. That our stories, you know, people talk about normalizing queer stories on the African continent, but what I mean is queer stories are our stories and these stories are normal, but you're not getting enough of them. And so that is, you know, where my work is at the moment.
If I may jump in there, Kevin. That's actually why, to add to what Frankie said, why I admire and kind of am excited about what the Initiative for Equal Rights, the NGO in Nigeria, is doing, as well as Equality Hub. They're trying to use visuals in terms of documentaries and films to tell our stories, because in that way, more audiences will consume that. You won't have to read a text to be able to understand the stories. And I think we should think along those lines. Join Achiro and the rest of the film and the documentary producers to see how we can flood the whole continent with our stories.
I'm 100% with you, except when you say you don't have to look for the text. I am a man of letters. As I said, books saved my life. I'm all about literature. Film is good, but people need to read. Not everybody's going to have access to a television set or a movie set, but in the intimacy of your home, under your covers with your touchlight, you can have a book and get lost in it. So
you wouldn't say a book will be a privilege, a class thing? Because I read mine, and Munshi may not be able to read that book, but he may be able to watch the movie and have one or two opinions about it.
I don't think that reading is an elitist sport. I don't think that books are a class thing. Everybody who, you know, in these countries you're talking about, everybody has a Bible or Quran. So people are reading. And so, you know, if you can read a religious text, then you can read a regular, normal book. I don't think that literature in any shape or form is something that is for the elite, is for something that is only for people who've had higher education. Absolutely not. I mean, there are many, many people who will read things like James Hadley Chase or, you know, Mills and Boons or whatever. And these are people without, you know, a tertiary level education. They can also read our stories if we make them available to them. Education and books cannot be taxed, and books should not be expensive. And this is my big issue with academic books, because they're only for certain kinds of people. A normal academic book in the United States will cost you about $80. A regular commercial book will cost you $14.99. And in Nigeria, you can get a local publisher to publish that book for 2,000 or 3,000 naira. Most people can actually decide that they want to read in a book and invest in it, just the same way they will invest in a film, just the same way they'll invest in a documentary. I think what we, as people who are part of this whole group of people who create and try to create accessible knowledge for people, should focus on is really flooding the market with our stories, whether it's in television, whether it's by streaming through Netflix, whether it's by documentary, or whether it's in the text, which is sacrosanct.
I agree with you.
I want to pull in Achiro now, also just to hear your thoughts on this, because you're doing that work, and yeah, what are your thoughts?
First of all, in Uganda, not many members of the media, let me not say media, let's say the film industry, not many people would like to write or make films about the LGBTQ community or theme, for two reasons. One, they're afraid. They're afraid. Two, they might not be given a license if they decide to go about it that way. And then three, at the end of the day, they're worried about where they're going to disseminate or show these films, because nobody's going to watch them, or even have actors to do it. So that's one side. Then on the other hand, we do have a little bit of literature, but it's not books per se. It's mainly magazines, and it's just information on the community that is being done by the different organizations in the community. And it's not so much that it's given out for free or even sold, or because where do they disseminate this, considering that it's banned in Uganda? And then we've had situations in schools whereby there are certain books that are pulled out as long as it has a gay character or anything LGBTQ. So there are those situations that make it almost hard for anybody to want to venture into disseminating information, whereby it gets to a point where by the end of the day, we're making films, we're telling our stories, we're writing our stories or whatever, but not for a Ugandan audience. We're writing it and hoping that the rest of the world will see it, and then maybe Ugandans somewhere will get excited and be like, oh, okay, let's also look at this or whatever. So there's that situation. We do have a couple of scholars, one or two, not that many, that have been vocal about the LGBTQ theme. They are not necessarily writing or making work about it for the same reasons. One, it's banned, you're not allowed to talk about it, you're not allowed to write about it. So there's just kind of balancing the whole, how far can you tell your stories? Where can you tell them? How can you tell them? And where will it come out? So there's just that. But at the end of the day, yeah, people like me have made the decision that we're going to tell these stories anyway. I have gotten 2 phone calls actually warning me. I wouldn't say threatening, I would say warning me about the stories that I'm telling. So there's that as well. So it's a real issue. It's a real threat concerning getting our works out there. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and it's just really sad that in this day and age, even with work in the arts and media, there are people still out there trying to, curtail that. But I just want to say, for me, it is interesting to say that it's interesting that it was out of Uganda that my wow moment came with representation, with works from Monica Arak-Denyako with her Kane winning story and under the Jambula tree. You know, for me that this was 2006, I think, when she won the Kane Prize for literature. For me, that was powerful, and it made me realize that it is possible to write. It is possible to write and read about African queer love in whatever shape or form. And that for me was really powerful.
And that's why she had to leave the country, actually.
I mean, it comes with a cost. You know, the work that we do comes with a cost. The work, you know, and I say that as an activist, but the fact that these stories are being done by Africans, are being read by Africans, and there's something that you said there that really struck me. Do we have to write for a global audience or produce art work or academic work for a global audience so that our local audience can be able to access that? Is that the way to go?
I'll answer that twofold from my opinion. One, the reason why I would make films and make it for a global audience is so that, one, it actually gets out there and I can actually have it seen or actually make 1 or 2 shillings from it. Yeah, that is one way. But on the other hand, many times for us, it's the only way that then people here get excited about it. Because, for example, one of my films, it had been refused here. Like I tried entering it in film festivals and the like, and they said, no, we don't have that. We don't do that. We don't have that theme. And then it's only when it started winning or making noise around, I don't even know how they get to know that suddenly it's making noise, right? Or when they had 1 or 2 different film festivals around the world where had given me an award, we're talking about it, then they actually invited me and were like, oh, can we show it? And they actually, it was one of the, in that year, Uganda Film Festival 2016, it was actually, what's the word, nominated for Best Film. It didn't win. And I know, I'm not necessarily saying it was, oh, it should have won because it was really, really good. But I know one of the reasons it didn't win is they can't make a film like that win. They'll get into trouble for it. But then for them, it kind of saved them face, like, oh, we are still celebrating a Ugandan filmmaker. So to answer your question, for me, that's the angle I take, because that's one way the people here will get to see it. If somebody else is making noise about it, it's almost like with the film Rafiki. If Rafiki didn't make noise internationally, I don't think the Kenyans would have made that much noise about it if she had just remained. But I don't think at the end of the day, she was making it per se for an international audience. It just had to go that way for it to actually make noise back down here in Africa. So for me, that's kind of the angle I was looking at.
And would the same apply to letters or words, you know, with Unoma in your work and Frank in your work, you know, and you've also seen with the likes of people of like Binyavanga, you know, only when works like yours and the work that Kwani did in the literary space, did people start saying, you know, there's space for queer literature from Africa, for queer writers. Do we have to do that? You know, and for me, it feels pretty sad that, you know, they say, what's that phrase? A prophet is not welcome in their own home. Are we that? And do we have to be that for the next few years?
So for me, I think that when, you know, I wrote my book for Africans, that's really, you know, where I stand on that. But I also, having been a journalist for many years, know that if you are creating work and you are thinking solely of audience, then it's a dangerous way to go. I think what we need to do is to create excellent work and see who's receptive to having it. Yes, of course, I wish, you know, most people on the African continent had access to my work first, but that's not the way it panned out. And I'm not upset that, you know, that it was released in America and released in UK and shortlisted for all these things and won this or that. But you do work that you think it's your best work. Because I always think to myself, if this is the last thing I write, if this is the last thing that I put out there, I want it to be stellar. And the audience will find it. You know, yes, of course, I want Africans to read my work more than anybody because I write about the love I have for this continent. But at the same time, you know, I'm not thinking that I need to publish this first in a particular place. I'm thinking I need to get it out to the world, and the people who see themselves in it will find me. So I think it's pretty dangerous if we start looking at people who publish and characterize them as, you know, trying to write for the West or trying to make things for the West first, because we all know who we would like to see our work. But the reality is, you know, you may not get that space at home. You know, somebody else may give you that space to do that work first. And your job really is to simply do a stellar piece of work that holds up anywhere. You know, not something that it's good enough for us at home. You want to do work that holds up wherever people see it. And they can say, well, the reporting is stellar, the writing is beautiful, X, Y, and Z. And so I think that we, you know, we put ourselves in a dangerous position if we start thinking that we must, or that if we get in the mindset that people who are doing work are doing it for international audiences first, because sometimes that's not the case.
Okay.
If I may add to that, yeah, our story is actually universal because any person of the LGBTQ community can identify with the pain we go through. So I think in that sense is universal. And first of all, I had approached a Nigerian publisher when I finished my book, but of course they were worried about the backlash. What will people say? What will the government say? But now a lot of them are coming to get the book to have a Nigerian edition because they have seen the reviews in Nigerian newspapers, and it's more about gossip and scandal. So maybe that will help them sell the book. And from whichever way the encouragement comes, I don't mind. But as long as the story is out there, you know. So it's unfortunate that we have to start from the West or publish from the West, but eventually the stories are for, in my own case, being the character for the typical Nigerian lesbian who may not have a model or who may not see her life in any kind of medium, you know, to hold on to this book and say, oh my God, I'm happy that there's somebody else who is like me. So wherever I start from, eventually I think it will get home to whoever may need it.
Right, and can I just add in, yeah. So I'm not saying this about any of your work, Frankie or Noma or Chiro, but what I see sometimes happen is when people on the continent think, I need to get this out there, I need to get it published in the West because it can't be published in Uganda or Cote d'Ivoire or whatever. So they write for a Western audience, right? And they perform a certain identity that is recognizable in the West that may betray aspects of their life in Africa, right? So, I mean, there's something a bit colonial about it that that I sometimes have to push back when I sometimes do editing for journals and things like that, and I get things, and people think, okay, if it's being published in the West, I need to cite Foucault, 25 times and Judith Butler 17 times, and I write back and say, no, you don't need to do that. Why don't you cite Sylvia Tamale, or why don't you cite Akil Mbembe, or something like that, right? So there's, I mean, I find it's a little bit ironic. Sometimes I'm sitting here in the West myself, but I'm pushing back against that kind of colonial mentality, if I can put it. That's too harsh, but I think you know what I mean. So writing in Africa, if it's possible, and I think it's getting there. And that's, if I can say, technology can be our friend, and we're being pushed a lot as academics in North America and a little bit in South Africa anyways, to do open access publishing, right? To do an end run around the increasing monopoly stranglehold that these big publishing houses have, and get things out for free. And I think it's a really positive development. How, with places like HSRC Press in South Africa, Human Sciences Research Council, they publish everything online for free, as well as in book form. So why can't we go that way more and more and more?
Well, writers need to eat. So if you're publishing our work for free, how are we supposed to survive?
Yeah, it requires subsidy. It has to have a government subsidy in some form. And that's
You know,
yearly, of course.
this at the end of the day, you know, no matter how much passion we have, this is actually work. You know, if you're creating knowledge, you're making films, you're making documentaries, and you're making books, or doing your best to do that, it's actually, no matter how much passion and how much committed you are, it is an investment of yourself and most likely the resources of your family. So if it's all complementary, how are you supposed to survive? You know, I think that books and films are good things and we should do more of our own stories. But I also think that people should pay for them because it's work. And there is value in our stories. There is value in what we do. You know, even in as much as we are trying to serve people continent-wide, but there is a cost to that. And until something costs you, you probably don't realize how much has gone into it.
I like the fact that, Mark, you mentioned this free publishing house, and then Frank, you brought in the element of, as creators, we have to eat. Are there opportunities that we in the media or we in arts and culture are missing out on, and within that space, in this telling our story, our queer stories, are there opportunities? Are we exclude? What stories are yet not being covered? So I'll just repeat that. Are there opportunities that are being missed in terms of telling the queer story, the African queer story? And in looking for those opportunities, are we excluding? Have we excluded anyone from coverage, from telling their stories within this African queer space? That would go to anyone in the panel.
I don't think we have the privilege to exclude anyone. It's almost like saying, can the underdog have the power to exclude anyone? No, I don't think we are. What we may have to work hard at is to include more allies, to convince whoever that's close to us that these stories are very important and need to be told. And I'm saying that because a couple of African scholars who are now writing on queer studies, I think, and I'm not bragging, are my friends, and they were able to empathize with some of my experiences as a lesbian, that they got curious enough to start exploring, you know, queer issues and queer studies. And today they're talking about it in their work. So no, we cannot afford to exclude, but we can afford and we need to include as many people as possible. And visibility comes into play here, but I'm not saying that that's a must, because I understand the dangers in Nigeria, for instance, or in Africa. But if we can start gradually, our friends, our parents, our sisters, our brothers, we can actually begin to create more landscape for our stories to be out there. That's my thought on that.
And that is why it is extremely important, you know, to get people to pay for things. Because sometimes the people who are excluding people, the people who are the gatekeepers, are the ones who control the means of production. You know, if you are giving away books or films about queer people for free, what is the incentive for a publisher or a distributor to do that? Because the answer will be that, well, nobody buys this stuff. You know, that this stuff is not something that's commercially viable. And they can, you know, somebody can say, well, you know, I'm not a homophobe and I'm not, you know, your story is important and I agree with you and all of that stuff. But it's just not good business because I will put the money to get these books out there and no one will buy them. So it is very important that we realize that our stories and our things matter, but they have value. And for us to get those gatekeepers to open the gates to other writers and filmmakers and other people to do stuff, we have to get people to see our work as commercially viable, which means that we have to, you know, get people to pay for them. Not just enjoy them, not just see themselves in literature, but make an investment that now allows a publisher, wherever they are on the African continent, to say, okay, you know, my most popular bestseller is a cookbook, but there is a community of people that will buy this book about this lesbian woman in our town. You know, it may not be our #1 bestseller, but there is a market for it. And right now, the people who are the real gatekeepers are those who are misleading people who are trying to create this work and get it out there on our continent by telling us there's no market for it, that nobody will buy it. That's why people sometimes turn to American and European publishers. Because at home, even if somebody says to you, listen, you know, I love you and I have nothing against LGBTQ people, but I run a business, you know. So our work is valuable and our work should not be complimentary, you know. And that is the way that we get the gatekeepers to open the doors to more writers, more poets, more filmmakers, because they will see that there is an actual market for this work.
But frankly, isn't that issue is for young creators, young media practitioners, the fact that currently on the continent, people are going into careers because there is money in there. And for example, here in Kenya, you know, actuarial sciences was the biggest thing because there was money in there, you know, and the fact that we, and even our own invisibility within that space is an issue, such that that's giving credence to the gatekeepers to say there is no market.
Well, here's the thing. There is no writer that I know personally. I know some by reputation, but there's no African writer that is a friend of mine that I know personally that doesn't have another gig. We're all doing something. You know, some people are lawyers, some people are doctors, some people are in IT, some people are full-time journalists, you know, but yet we still have this passion and we're still doing this thing where we create work. Not really expecting that, okay, this is going to be the thing that, you know, gives us food for the rest of our life, but because this work is important to us and we put so much into it out there. But everybody still has some sort of a day job. Because, you know, we're living in Africa and you have to eat, you have to do work. But if you're going to do all of that stuff and you're going to pour your passion into a project that you're going to do at the end of your day when you've done your regular work that pays you and pays your bills and all of that stuff, that stuff that you put out there has to be bought for by someone. And that is how we transition from being just trying to make a difference to saying that we have a viable audience. We have people that read our work and those people should be serviced. And who should service those people? The publishers, the bookstores, all of those people, you know. And it is important that we value not just our lives, but we value the work that we're doing, even if it's from passion. You know, there is an audience. There are people who are buying these books. And those people who are buying these books, they're not some minuscule minority somewhere. There are people all over the African continent who struggle, you know, to get a book. Somebody will hear of Unoma's book and be looking for somebody who has a Kindle machine or something to be able to get this book. I've seen it in my travels. I know it, you know, but the issue is getting publishers on the ground to take us as a buying power seriously enough to say, okay, well, maybe you won't sell 1 million copies, but you can definitely sell maybe 20,000. And that's 20,000 that you hadn't sold before for a publisher. So we really need to not just value our work, but push back against the fact that people believe there's not an audience out there, because there is. And we've seen it. If you go to a Bantu Book Festival, you will see, you know, Black people for miles lining up to hear Black authors, lining up to buy books, even queer ones, you know. But it's the same publishers in South Africa that will tell you, as I was told over and over again by the mainstream publishers, that there's no market for my book there. And that has proven to be false. So I think that we cannot allow people to continue to drive the bus because by erasing us or by making us invisible. We do buy books, we do watch films, we do consume all of these things, but we need an opportunity to be able to do these things. And if the gatekeepers don't allow the audience to come and purchase this, then they can get away with saying that, you know, there's no market for this.
Achiro, I want to ask you, have you also, what are your thoughts on this? Have you met other gatekeepers within Uganda who've told you there's no market for your work?
Achiro left.
I thought, okay, oh, pity, Achiro, unfortunately. Okay. Mark, do you want to add any thoughts to what Frankie and Noma have shared?
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I mean, I think one way to go, because the cost of producing a quality book is very high, and the profit margin in kind of the capitalist publishing world is very low. But one way to go is to seek out funders, like subsidies. So that could be through, for example, I did publish a book with gays and lesbians of Zimbabwe, and we got a big subsidy from the Open Society Institute. So we just went to them. So they're a New York-based philanthropy, I guess you'd say. They've got a lot of money. A lot of rich people have got stacks of money and they're looking for places to put it. And so I think we can be proactive in going, like, so in that case, the Open Society Institute, we approached them and the next day they said, well, here's 10,000 US. And that goes a long way when you're putting a small book together. But even so, and we charged for the book, we sold it, gave away a lot of copies, but we still haven't made a profit after that was 2008. So, if you took the subsidy away, that book would not exist. So going for subsidies, big philanthropists, and GoFundMe, whatever, I think maybe we have to get out of the capitalist book publishing system, which has increasingly consolidated into larger and larger multinational corporations, much more so than the last few decades, right? So the small publishing houses are getting gobbled up, and unfortunately, like if I can go back to that encyclopedia situation, that it's a fantastic production, but I asked at the very beginning, how can we make this available in Africa? Okay, subsidized or something. And the company said, no, we can't do that. We're a business. And so it comes back to what Frankie was saying. Yeah, they're saying there's no market. But when you charge $800 for a book, what do you expect? 800 US. So obviously they price themselves out of a normal individuals. Only institutions can buy that book right now. But what we can also do is once it's there, and this is my point of spreading the wealth, is so I can send PDFs, and yes, I'm breaking the law to do that, but whatever, we have to break the model, right? So that's my thought on that.
Okay. I like that, breaking the model. I want to move on to the element of visibility. And I'll throw this to Frankie and Noma, being writers with your works, and also thank you for giving me the opportunity to having produced your work for the podcast. What reactions have you received from people back here on the continent, and how does that, and how important is visibility, especially in finding our representation?
Well, visibility is very important, but visibility for a Nigerian is complicated because it's complex, because you have to worry about, well, what happens to my job? What happens to my family? So unless there's a level of independence in your life, that's the way I look at it. You can pay your bills, feed yourself, pay your rent, then you can afford to be visible if it's something you want to take on, because it doesn't really come at a low cost, So I wouldn't blame any Nigerian or African that is not yet comfortable to be visible. Fortunately, though, the social media has given us a platform where we can voice our opinions and share our lives without giving the audience access to where you are. So that more or less takes care of a lot of things, where there's a larger platform where you can afford to be visible and be able to avoid whatever backlash or attacks you may have. But in all, we must be visible to be able to push our stories and our lives.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Achiro, just to rope you back in, we're talking about visibility and its importance. thanks to the work that we have done. So I'll let you ruminate on that a little bit. But Frankie, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I think visibility is key for us in many, many ways. I don't think that, as Unoma said, everyone can afford to be super duper extremely out and visible that way. But everyone can be visible to somebody. And I always tell a story about a friend of mine for 20 years who lives here in Ghana with me, and for many years was fond of saying things like, "Oh, Frankie, you're the only out gay person I know. In fact, you're the only gay person I know." And I would say to him, "Brother, are you sure?" And then one day I said to him, "But I've just met your brother-in-law and his partner." And he was like, "Oh, yeah, you know, I didn't really know. I just thought that was his friend." I'm like, okay. So I think it's important that we are visible to the people that love us and care about us. And that is a cost that sometimes we have to bear, you know, in that people who really, really love us may not understand us in the beginning if we're out to them, which is different from being out at work, which is different from being out at church, which is different from being out in a million other places. But people that really care about you, that really love you, I think they deserve to know the complete you. And that little bit of visibility now allows them to think about their own biases and their own phobias when they're in public, or when they're in positions of making decisions, or even just checking people with their language. But if people can get away with thinking they know none of us, we are not part of their families, we are not anywhere that concerns them, then some of that is our fault. You know, so visibility is key to change, but not everybody can be super duper public, but you can definitely let the people that care about you know who the real you is.
But just in response to that, we live on a continent where even telling those people who care about us, about our queerness, will cost us a roof over our head, will cost us, you know, safety and security. It's a bit of a double-edged sword there, don't you think?
Sure it is, but you know, if you have a best friend for 20 years and they're gonna get rid of you, then maybe they don't deserve to be your best friend because of that. I'm not saying that you should tell, you know, I mean, everybody has to weigh the risk, you know, but I just cannot imagine, you know, my life if my siblings and my late parents didn't know the complete me. Even if, you know, there was the risk of me being thrown out of home, you know. And because of the love of my mother and my brothers, I've been able to do the things that, you know, that I've done, knowing fully well that there is a circle that knows me and accepted me for who I am. Everybody deserves that. You know, I think coming out is a very strange thing because you've processed it and you've thought about it and you've dealt with yourself for years. But then somebody who's been close to you for a very long time and you drop the information to them, they may not be as quick to understand. Or you may get the other reaction, which is, well, I've always known. I was just waiting for you to say it. You just don't know. But I think that we can be timid and live a life of timidity, or we can be strategic. You don't have to come out at work if it's going to cost you your job. But does your best friend need to know that they should stop bringing women for you to marry?
Oh, men. Mark, I'd like to know your thoughts on visibility as we.
Well, while Frankie was speaking, I was thinking of the Me Too movement in North America and the recent anti-racism demonstrations. And, you know, to me, those have been really successful. So people had kept secrets. Now, just on my way to where I am right now, yesterday I was listening to a long story on the news, and women who were raped by this very powerful corporate figure 40 years ago. And they kept the secret buried inside them their whole life. And on this story, the woman was telling the story for the first time in public, and her daughter was there and in tears. I didn't know this, Mom, you know. And it was a transformative experience for that family and for the whole of society to hear this. And the journalist was asking, you know, how could this happen? And we didn't know. And the person wasn't a misogynist or was very sympathetic. And we have to end rape in this country. But we just didn't know. It was so pervasive, and that these rich, powerful men were able to keep a lid, and the women were ashamed to come out, and now they are coming out, and it's moving society in a positive way. And I think the same with the anti-racism stuff. Of course, people knew, yes, there's police brutality and this and that, and we see what's on a TV show, but it's still kind of glamorized. And now people are coming out and saying, no, this is day-to-day oppression that's happening. And here in Canada, we always say, okay, it's not as bad as in the States, or, you know, the old imperial powers. Somehow we're morally better. But now the stories are coming out here too, and people are saying, I didn't know that this was happening, you know, in multicultural Toronto and this and that. So the visibility can move people who otherwise, you know, they're not homophobic, I would say, or they're not misogynist or racist necessarily. They're sincerely ignorant. And if we can move them along, but of course, it's the risk is there for people to come out, and the humiliation and the danger. It takes a lot of courage, but when more people do it, you get a safety in numbers kind of thing, and then it becomes you get a situation where, you know, men are boasting about they conquered this woman and this and that kind of, you know, crude macho stuff. But when one man speaks out and say, bro, you can't talk that way about women, then another guy will say, yeah, that's right, you can't, right? And so you get I don't know, I'm being idealistic perhaps, but we're seeing a change happen here in North America. I think, Unoma, you can tell me what it's like in the southern states, but I'm encouraged, but understanding what a risk it can be, you know, to lose family, to lose friends, and all that. So that's, individuals have to choose that, but safety in numbers, so to speak. Yeah, so.
Before we wind up, just something, Unoma, you touched on this, and it touches on visibility, and I've had issues with this where people say coming out is a privilege. What are your thoughts on that, people?
Well, I have two answers, yes and no. It's a privilege because, like I said, if you're not able to take care of yourself, and the people with the power are homophobic, they'll strip you of everything. And I'll say, no, it's not a privilege because it's actually about survival. Let's say I'm a lesbian and nobody knows. You know, so how long am I going to hide that girl I tell my mother is my best friend? Or how long am I going to say, no, I don't want to get married to the man? Well, you refused 5 men. What's the problem? Obviously, it can't be the man. It has to be you. How do you escape such expectations or curiosity? So in that way, it may be better to come out, you know, and say, well, look, this is what I am. So to a certain level, you're left alone, or they'll find a way to deal with the fact that you're different from everybody else, you know. But like Mike said, and Frankie said, I'm sorry, it's important that we're visible because at the end of the day, it humanizes who we are. It lets people know that we're human beings. We're not demons, we're not evil, we're not a mami water or whatever else we're qualified as. So we cannot escape visibility. We have to be. But the next issue for me is how can we as a community help ourselves in combating some of the effects of coming out? Or do we have the resources to take care of each other where that becomes the case? Or how do we work with even the police in Nigeria, for instance, to know that there's a difference between one person or a person being gay and being, for somebody else to attack him or her for being what they are. They're not particularly committing any crime by being what they are, even as visible people, compared to where they deserve to be punished because they're gay. Being gay is not a crime. So in that sense, it's okay to be visible. So that visibility will help us, I think, cross the other bridges of oppression, be it in the military or be it in the police or be it in a job environment.
Mark, if you could chime in there, please, briefly, and then we'll come to you, Frankie.
You mean on the question, is it coming out of privilege or not?
Yeah. There are people who say that coming out is a privilege. Just what are your thoughts, especially here on the continent?
Well, I mean, I'm agreeing with what Unoma said. It's, for some people, they have the means to support themselves, and the majority of the population in some countries don't, and so they really have to depend on the goodwill of others just to put food on the table. So, I mean, we can't blame people who don't choose that. I guess one thing I'll say is it's an interesting debate that's happening in some circles about whether there needs to be a coming out at all, whether that's a Western thing and that Africans don't need to do that. I've heard that debate, and I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it, but the gist of that argument is that, you know, we have our ways, we have our culture, and why should we copy the strategies that have been used in the West? I'm putting that out there. I'm not agreeing with that myself, but you do hear that. And what I guess people mean by that is we had our ways in traditional societies where we could be, and people let us be with certain etiquettes observed. And that worked in the past. And what happened, what changed was, you know, the Christianity came in and hardline forms of Islam that were intolerant. But this is a new phenomenon. So maybe we can reach back into our past, and we don't have to be out like, you know, in the modern kind of Western gay sense. We can be ourselves within a traditional rubric. So again, it's an argument. Personally, I would say it's 2020. You can't go back to 1820. So things have changed, you know. But there are people who are making that case, and I can be sympathetic with their argument, although in practical terms, even if you throw HIV into it, you know, you can't have people in the closet with something like HIV circling around. Closet, even if you say it's a traditional way of being, it often it's hiding what in effect is certain behaviors that are actually unhealthy for HIV. So I don't agree with that argument, but I personally, I think, you know, the more that's out there, the better. But it's easier for me to say that than someone living on the street in Johannesburg or what have you. So, yeah.
Okay. Frankie.
So there's a lot to unpack here, but you know, one of the first things is it always sort of like, I always have to ponder like the conflation of, you know, a sexually transmitted infection with someone's life. You know, all kinds of people have HIV, and it should not be a decision whether somebody decides to leave their throat or not, because so many people have HIV around the continent. The other thing is, there is the assumption, which I will strongly push back against, that everybody who comes out to their family will be thrown out. That does a disservice to the thousands and millions of parents who love their gay children on this African continent, who have never left this continent, who love them, who are, you know, are proud of them, but they know the difficulty that they face and maybe want to keep it at home, in-house. But not everybody, you know, who comes out to their family members is left sleeping on the street. That is just not true. It is true for many, and that does not in any way take away from those people's experiences. But I also think that, you know, we should think about the parents who love their children, who take care of their children, who accept their children. When people say, you know, coming out is a Western thing and we should go back to the traditional ways, I say, fine, let's go back to the traditional ways. I'm living in Accra, and there's a part of Accra where the Ga people are, and they've always had what they call kojobisia. These are the translation of, you know, boy-like girls, and there've never been any social prescriptions against them. So if we're allowed to be that in the village, that's the same thing as being visible. That's the same thing as coming out. You know, for people who would now say, you know, it's a privileged thing to be able to come out. I don't know where that comes from, you know, because you have to, it is a survival thing. It is a survival thing. And I have met more people than I can count whose lives are stifled by the fact that they have to be in relationships and in marriages that they wanted no part of. But because of social stigma, they're in those marriages and they're not allowed to be with their beloveds, or they have to be in secret. If those people were out, or if those people then come out, it is not because they have the privilege of money. It's because they simply cannot do it anymore, you know? And when you get to the point in your life where you realize that you have one life and you have lost years, and you decide to come out and you lose things, those people know that yes, they may have lost material things, maybe they might even have lost some social relationships, but there is a freedom. They have the freedom to live that they have not had for a very long time. So when people talk about privileges and coming out, it's an old trope of equating us with the West, that we're copying what is being done in the West, when here on the African continent, we have had all sorts of diversity. We don't like labels, we don't like putting names on things, but you look at all of our societies, you look at all of our communities, every label that you can get from the West, we've had them here. Before Christianity, before Islam, we've had all sorts of people here. So I don't subscribe to the notion that for us to try and be free, some people would say we are trying to copy the West. But even if we are, so what? Where in the part of Nigeria where I come from, 3-4 generations ago, we used to kill twins because we thought only animals had multiple births. Yeah, they didn't do that in the West. And we had to come to the realization that every life is precious, whether it's a twin or a triplet. You know, I would not be alive today if my grandmother had been born a boy, but she was a twin girl. You know, there were 2 girls. If there were twin boys, or the whole thing could have been terrible. If there was a boy, she might have been tossed away. So the reality is that culture is not static. Culture changes for the better. And sometimes it's outside change. So I always find when people tell us here on the African continent that we are trying to be Western because we are doing things that are unpopular, it's a way of trying to shut us down. We want to be visible. Those of us who can afford to be visible because we have the love of family, takes away from no one who cannot afford to be that visible. You know, but we should not be shut down because there are some of us on our continent whose families are okay with us the way they are because they know and have been with us from the very beginning that maybe what society expects of us is not what we're able to deliver. So I want us to be very, very careful when we think about when people throw words around like, you know, it's a privilege for you to come out, and make this story that we see about the African narrative that everyone's on the street and everyone's poor and nobody has any support and it's all just shit. It's not. We are like every other place in the world. There are people who are supportive. There's a lot of people who aren't. There's a lot of voices that are against us, but the reality on the ground is that not everybody is a homophobe on this continent. It's just not true.
Thank you very much for that, Frankie. And I think on that note, we will bring this panel to an end. And I think it is important that in the work that we do as writers, as academics, and as filmmakers or documentary makers, it's a pity we lost Achiro towards the end, that it is important that we change the narrative and the work. If you ever get to look at her documentary, and she's passionate about changing the narrative in Uganda, that not everyone, you know, is being hounded for being queer in Uganda. The work that you are doing, Frankie, Unoma, in literature, and thank you. Thank you on behalf of those who read, who want to read the stories. Thank you for giving us a voice in the ways that you have presented to us. Mark, in your field in academia, thank you for the work, for taking time to look for those academics, to write about about queer theory, about queer academia. Thank you for that. And thank you all for taking the time to be part of this panel. It's been fantastic, very engaging. And yeah, keep sharing African stories. Thank you for being part of Pride Africa. I'm Kevin Mochiro, Unoma, Frankie, Mark. Thank you very much for being part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and Noma and Frankie.